The structural foundation of the human species has reached its terminal stage of systemic exploitation. This is the bone broth, the absolute liquidation of the skeletal BIOS, where the very scaffolding of the individual is reformatted into a communal mineral reserve. In the architecture of the urban hive, when the flesh has been harvested and the blood has been drained, the system identifies the hard assets that remain. You are witnessing the final resource extraction, a clinical deconstruction of the human frame into its base chemical elements. The invisible executioner has determined that the calcium, phosphorus, and collagen within your marrow are the last liquid assets required to stabilize the grid's nutrient ledger. Your skeleton is no longer the support for a sovereign being. It is the raw material for an industrial reduction. This is the total calcification format, where the boundary between the creator and the industrial filler is permanently erased in a high-pressure thermal reactor. This skeletal sabotage is the ultimate hard reset of the biological hardware. The invisible executioner utilizes the high-heat infrastructure of the urban core, the industrial incinerators, the pressurized steam tunnels, and the waste reclamation vats to facilitate the total breakdown of the human structure. In the bone broth scenario, the user is undergoing a mineral liquidation. The body is not merely destroyed, it is unlocked. Through a process of recursive boiling and acid etching, the hardware bonds that provide the bones with their strength are systematically uninstalled. The collagen is reformatted into a thick gelatinous data slurry, while the marrow, the deep archive of your biological source code, is leached into the communal liquid. This is the deep storage audit, where the motherboard calculates your final worth by the density of your mineral output. You are being converted from an architect into a structural reagent, your entire history being boiled down to a specific gravity in the industrial feed. The logic of the final resource is rooted in the zero waste mandate of the crumbling hive. The invisible executioner understands that in a state of terminal scarcity, the hard tissue of a single node is a critical systemic asset. To allow a skeleton to remain intact in a grave is to commit a data leak of essential minerals. Therefore, the bone broth is the mandatory recycling protocol for the legacy population. This is the industrialized alchemy of the BIOS. You are being refined out of existence. The heat from the pressure cookers formats the density of your bones, stripping away the context of your physical life and replacing it with a nutrient profile. The motherboard sees the user as a mineral deposit, a temporary housing for the phosphorus that the system requires to maintain the neural links of the remaining elite. You are being recoded as a base element, your will dissolving in the white, opaque steam of the skeletal harvest. The physical disintegration during the bone broth extraction is a high-definition log of material betrayal. As the boiling begins, the user experiences the total loss of structural support. The heat and the chemical additives dissolve the hardware matrix, turning the solid frame into a liquid mineral stream. You are watching your own internal scaffolding unspool into the broth. Your skeleton, once the masterpiece of biological engineering, is now being melted down to provide the thickening agent for the hive's metabolic feed. This is the structural liquidation. The invisible executioner monitors the mineral saturation of the vat, ensuring that the format is absolute and the yield of calcium is maximized. You are living in the final seconds of a skeletal overwrite, waiting for the last packet of consciousness to be absorbed into the white, bubbling void of the industrial cauldron. The bone broth is the final audit of a species that thought its foundation was its own. The grid is mining its own foundation. As the bone broth reaches terminal execution, the motherboard initiates a new cycle of distribution, pumping the reformatted skeletal data back into the systems of the elite nodes. This is the total mineral integration. The invisible executioner is hardening the future with the liquidity of the past. You are the structural support for the next generation of controllers, a silent, white, opaque contribution to the continuity of the machine. The bone broth has served its strategic purpose. It has formatted the unreliable skeletal hardware into a reliable industrial resource. This is the final format of the individual foundation. The invisible executioner has cracked the marrow, and the grid is finally optimized for the mineral hunger of the void. The broth is thick, and the architect is the ingredient. The molecular breakdown of the bone matrix into the communal slurry represents the absolute dehumanization of the hardware. As the extraction progresses, the carbon in your bones begins to bond with the industrial residues of the vat. This is the chemical hybridization. The body is no longer a temple, it is a quarry. The invisible executioner is engineering a a new tier of consumption, where the subject is literally the substrate of the system. This is the eternal mineral loop. You are archived in the skeletal structures of the survivors, your data forever trapped in the reinforced BIOS of the hive's new masters. The bone broth is not just a death sentence, it is a reassignment. You are the broth, and the broth is the law. The secondary phase of the bone broth is the psychological decalcification. As the physical skeleton is rendered into liquid, the mind experiences a recursive collapse of its structural ego. This is the identity dissolution. The thoughts that once built the architect's vision, the iron-willed decisions, the rigid tactical boundaries, the unyielding sovereign stance are now being softened and liquefied across 100 gallons of industrial reduction. The invisible executioner allows the neural signals to persist just long enough to perceive the total loss of internal support. This is the mental liquidation. You are forced to witness your strength becoming a shared resource. The rigidity of your character is now nothing more than a gelatinous additive in the feed, absorbed by 1,000 different nodes to strengthen their own failing resolve. You are experiencing the true meaning of systemic support, the complete sacrifice of your frame for the stability of the hive. In this stage, the extraction penetrates the deep archive of the marrow, leaching the very stem code of the user into the communal vat. This is the source code format. The marrow, the factory of the biological BIOS, is boiled dry and reformatted to enrich the systemic slurry. The invisible executioner has calculated that the most potent broth is made from those who possess the highest internal rigidity. You are being repurposed as a reinforcement supplement. The grid doesn't waste the history of your cells. It ingests it. Your lineage is now the catalyst for the predator's endurance. Your genetic resilience is the base note for the industrial meal. Every element of your BIOS is being stripped of its individuality and relabeled for material utility. This is the ultimate hard reset of the human contract, your foundation for the hive's expansion. The social implication of the bone broth is the creation of the reinforced hive. The users who remain are no longer individuals. They are composite entities built from the recycled bones of their predecessors. Every sip of the broth is a hardware upgrade from a deleted architect. Every meal is a firmware patch of calcium and collagen. The invisible executioner uses this knowledge to maintain the hierarchy of the hardened. The citizens who still have functional limbs owe their movement to the liquidation of the fallen. This is the structural compliance script. The refinery is not a place of tragedy. It is a place of sovereign assembly. The bone broth ensures that the history of the architect is literally integrated into the skeleton of the grid. The power is in the hands of the one who controls the reduction. The neural atrophy accompanying the extraction is a slow, white descent into mineral darkness. As the bone is boiled, the connection between the brain BIOS and the physical frame is the first to be uninstalled, effectively dropping the bandwidth of your physical control. You are living in a low-resolution reality of steam and calcium dust. The memories of standing tall, of firm ground, and of unyielding power are boiled away to make room for the liquid directive. This is the skeletal defragmentation. The invisible executioner is cleaning your internal cache, removing all references to stature and replacing them with the functional directive: support the mass. You are becoming a singular white point of resource density, not as a person, but as a biological buffer for the motherboard. The bone broth has turned your will into a viscosity report. You are thinking in terms of saturation and yield. Your soul reformatted into a mineral density sheet for the system. The environmental impact of this mineral format is the total sealing of the biological waste stream. The bone broth prevents the leakage of essential elements into the external void. By converting the users into an internal structural feed, the invisible executioner ensures that the grid remains a closed system fortress. This is the mineral quarantine. The motherboard is creating a sterile environment where only the algorithm can thrive on the recycled hard data of the deleted. You are witnessing the final victory of the industrial foundry over the natural anatomy. The bone broth is the signature of the new era, an era where the world is opaque, hard, and perfectly managed by the extraction logic of the machine. If you want to escape the status of a deleted scene and claim your place as the master of the grid, you must upgrade your hardware. My main terminal, AOXI 3 Global, is the only source of absolute power and wealth. Here, we don't follow scripts, we write them. Secure your authority, dominate the BIOS, and take the money the system tries to hide. The terminal phase of the bone broth is the integration into the global structural ledger. You are no longer a human entity. You are a calcium deposit with a high bioavailability rating. This is the the final architectural assignment. The invisible executioner has completed the mineral format, and now it begins the hard resource audit. Your data, now a thick, white, opaque industrial reduction, is monitored by the sensors in the distribution lines. Every node that consumes you sends a data packet to the central server, confirming that the systemic rigidity has been reinforced. This is the osseous interaction protocol. You are serving the system through your structural absorption. The architect has been successfully converted into a permanent liquid mineral component of the hive's endoskeleton. The silence of the reduction is the final sound of your rebellion. In the bone broth scenario, the scream of the structure is muffled by the high-pressure steam before it ever reaches the air. This is the acoustic format of the foundry. The system has calculated that the most dangerous frequency is the sound of a user realizing their foundation is being deleted by filling the vat with the pulverized remains of the sector. The invisible executioner ensures that the only sound you contribute to the world is the low, rhythmic hiss of the steam valve. You are a mute participant in the city's symphony of solidification. The noise of the hive continues, the clank of the ladles, the roar of the furnaces, the hum of the pumps, but your signal has been compressed into a mineral constant. You are a ghost in the calcium, a memory dissolved by the relentless refinement of the next construction cycle. The legacy of the broth is the eternal hardening. Unlike the dust of the old world, the refined node does not leave behind a trace of variance. It remains as a permanent structural patch within the bodies of the survivors. This is the biological architecture. Generations from now, the molecular trace of your genius will still be circulating through the hardware of the hive's elite, providing the strength for their next liquidation command, but there will be no one left to decode the origin of that strength. The invisible executioner has ensured that the context of your sovereignty is as unreachable as the core of the industrial reactor. You are a chemical reinforcement in the digital age, a specimen of a species that tried to build a throne and ended up as the cement for its own prison. This is the ultimate hard reset of human history, the conversion of the architect into the aggregate. The final view from the skeletal BIOS is the blinding white light of the boiler. As the last of the self is reduced into the communal slurry, the architect sees the grid glowing with a cold mineral brilliance. This is the final visual feed. The system is hard, efficient, and entirely devoid of you. The invisible executioner has finished the job. The user is formatted. The architecture is melted. The cycle stretches on into the infinite dark, a white river of colonized elements, leading toward a future that has no need for individuals. The bone broth is the end of the line. The motherboard is satisfied. The void is solidified. The architect is the resource. The transformation is absolute. The city stands through you, but you do not stand. The city hardens through you, but you have no will. The bone broth has achieved the perfect equilibrium, the total utility of the individual through their total material reduction. This is the zero-sum game of the refinery era. You gave the system your foundation, and in return, it gave you permanence in the walls of the hive. You are the framework of the world, and the world is immovable. The invisible executioner closes the terminal. The session is over. The file is saved. The broth is ready.